A working K9 should never leave his handler, especially not in a hospital parking lot. But this time, Diesel ran, not toward a suspect, not toward danger. He ran to a quiet SUV, parked 3 rows over. He barked once, then twice, then stopped, and pressed his nose to the fogged window. Inside, a baby bottle on its side, a motionless child in a car seat. No one had even noticed the vehicle. Not the nurse standing beside it. Not the handler still yelling for Diesel to return. And no one heard the baby's cry. Except him. He would not leave the door. Even the EMTs froze, because what happened next left them in tears. Like, share, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. We'd love to know. Diesel had never disobeyed a command. Not in the 2 years Officer Ramirez had handled him. Not during the drills, the simulations, the long midnight patrols. But something shifted that day. Something subtle. The kind of shift you don't notice until it's already happening. It started the way most afternoons did. Hot sun, stale air, static in the radio. They were stationed near the outpatient wing of St. Mary's General, watching a patient transfer. Diesel sat perfectly still by Ramirez's side, vest on, eyes alert. His breathing was steady, his ears twitching slightly in the breeze. Then, a blink, a shift in weight, and without a single warning, Diesel stood up and walked. Ramirez didn't speak at first, just stared. Diesel had never broken formation without instruction. But now he was trotting, not rushing, down the side lane between parked vehicles. "Diesel!" Ramirez called once. Not loud, not angry, more confused than anything. Diesel didn't look back. At first, no one noticed. People were wheeling relatives across crosswalks, stepping into taxis, pushing double strollers under the shade of the ER awning. Normal, safe, predictable, until Diesel stopped. He froze beside a white SUV, 3 rows out, passenger side. His nose hovered just inches from the window. Then he barked, just once. Ramirez started walking, already radioing in a code to dispatch. Not a threat, not a suspect. Just unusual behavior. The bark came again. Then a pause. Then Diesel pressed one paw against the door. That's when Ramirez's pace quickened, and that's when heads started turning. Because something about Diesel's stillness, his posture, his silence, felt wrong. Like the dog knew something everyone else didn't. A nurse paused mid-conversation. A man with an arm cast lowered his phone. A volunteer pushing a wheelchair actually stopped pushing. When Ramirez reached the car, he saw it immediately. There was a baby bottle tipped on the floorboard. The windows were fogged from the inside, faintly steamed. A pink sock sat on the dashboard, half hanging over the vent. And in the car seat behind the passenger seat, a baby. Still. Strapped in. Ramirez didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply stared. The sun glared off the glass. The inside looked hot. Too hot. Diesel barked again. This time, sharper. More urgent. Another man came over. Then a woman. Then 2 more staffers, all in scrubs. "Whose car is this?" someone called. No answer. Someone pounded on the window, as if that would wake the child. Another pulled out their phone, already calling 911, even though they were standing at a hospital. Then came the detail Ramirez wouldn't forget. Diesel didn't bark anymore. He sat. Back straight, eyes on the glass, as if guarding it. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even excitement. It was presence. Complete, focused, unwavering presence. Ramirez radioed in again, this time not for backup, but for an emergency responder to the parking lot. It didn't matter that they were 30 feet from the ER doors. Protocol was protocol. But Diesel wasn't waiting for protocol. The handler placed a hand on the SUV's hood. Hot to the touch. The air inside had to be worse. A nurse crouched down near the window, peering through her palm against the glare. I think the baby's breathing, but it's shallow. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even as the lot buzzed and stretched around them, right there, beside the SUV, everything slowed. And Diesel still hadn't moved. By the time the EMT arrived, the small crowd around the SUV had grown from 3 to over a dozen. Most kept their distance, unsure if they were witnessing a crime, a rescue, or just a malfunctioning dog. But Diesel stayed locked in place, eyes on the child, body still. And the longer he sat there, the more certain everyone became. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was wrong, and Diesel wasn't leaving. The medic crouched down to get a view inside. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but her voice had the kind of edge that came from seeing real emergencies. "The child's skin looks flushed," she said. "Probably overheating. Breathing's fast, too fast for sleep." Another nurse leaned in. "No movement? Minimal," the EMT replied. "Could be shallow breathing. We can't wait on this." Ramirez had already tried the doors. Locked. He circled the vehicle, checked for an open window. Nothing. The back windshield was fogged heavily now, forming small trails of moisture down the inside glass. "Could be 20 minutes," someone muttered behind him. "Maybe longer." The woman speaking wasn't medical. She was a bystander, older, with 2 grandkids of her own. She didn't have data, but she had lived long enough to read the fear in a room. Diesel barked again, sharp and sudden, the kind of bark that stopped everything cold. That was when the EMT made the call. "Break the window!" A tech from inside the hospital came out carrying an emergency punch tool. No keys, no hesitation, just movement. The first strike hit the rear passenger glass. It splintered, spidered, but didn't give. Second strike. It cracked clean, sagging slightly inward. That was when the first cry came through. Soft, guttural. A sound that was halfway between confusion and instinct. The child was alive. Hands moved quickly after that, unlocking the door, lifting the baby out, checking vitals. The medic's hands shook slightly, but her voice stayed even. "Skin's hot. Baby's responsive. We caught it in time." Diesel, still watching, gave a final huff of air, then stood. Only then. He turned toward Ramirez, ears back, not in shame, but in relief. As if now, and only now, his job was done. People clapped, but no one smiled. Not yet. They were too stunned. "Where's the mother?" someone finally asked. No one had an answer. That's when a man in scrubs walked over from the far edge of the lot. He had a clipboard, a slight limp, and a look of disbelief on his face. "We just pulled a woman from the side of the building," he said. "Collapsed. Dehydrated. She'd been out there maybe 20 minutes. Then, after a beat, she kept saying, 'The car, the car.'" Ramirez's stomach dropped. Was she carrying anything? No, but she had a diaper bag over her shoulder. Light pink. Empty bottle inside. Everything clicked. The sock, the bottle, the car seat. The silence. She hadn't abandoned her child. She had collapsed trying to come back for her. The moment hit like a wave. One mother, unconscious. One baby, fading in the heat. And one dog, trained to obey, but built to feel, who had put the pieces together when no one else could. Ramirez crouched beside Diesel and placed a hand gently on his head. "You felt that," he whispered. "I don't know how, but you felt that." Diesel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because he hadn't just acted on training. He had acted on something deeper, and that decision saved a life. The baby's eyes fluttered as a nurse adjusted the cold compress on her forehead. Tiny hands flexed once, then settled. She was stable, but quiet. Not asleep, just quiet in that eerie way babies get after they've cried too long and nothing changed. A different EMT had arrived to tend to the mother, who now lay inside the ER on a wheeled stretcher. Her skin was pale and blotched from the heat, but her vitals were climbing. She kept whispering the same words, "My car, my baby," on repeat. The two were being stabilized on opposite sides of the hospital, neither yet aware of the other's survival. Outside, the SUV sat empty and broken, its rear window shattered inward, the dashboard smeared with fingerprints and sweat. But it was no longer the center of attention. Now all eyes were on Diesel. One of the techs, mid-40s, tired eyes, crouched near the dog and just stared. How did he know? He finally asked. No one answered, because nobody really knew. There had been no cry loud enough, no movement visible from 3 rows away, no scent that a human nose could have picked up. And yet, Diesel had known exactly where to go. Ramirez watched the others processing it. Civilians, nurses, orderlies, even the bystanders seemed unsure whether to be in awe or disbelief. Diesel had broken protocol, but he had broken it with purpose, and that unsettled people more than if he'd made a mistake. "He's trained for bombs and narcotics, right?" someone asked. Ramirez nodded slowly. Yes, but none of that was in play today. That answer didn't settle anything. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Diesel sat at Ramirez's feet now, back in formation, as if none of it had happened. But the weight of it hadn't faded. Not for Ramirez. Not for anyone who had watched it unfold. Inside the ER, the baby's cry came again. Louder this time. Clearer. Alive. Everyone froze for just a moment. The sound echoed slightly down the corridor and out the sliding glass doors. And Diesel, ears perked, lifted his head, just slightly. It was as if he recognized it. Not the noise itself, but the tone. The same soft, desperate rhythm he must have caught through the glass. That was the second cry, and it confirmed what they were all starting to believe. Diesel hadn't just sensed danger. He had heard something no one else could. Not a threat. A heartbeat. A child's cry through the glass. Through the heat. Through the fog, Ramirez turned to the small group forming near the nurse's station. "I'm filing this as a life-saving intervention," he said firmly. "Diesel gets credit." There was no resistance, just quiet agreement, the kind people give when they've seen something they can't explain. The baby was reunited with her mother. Later that evening, no cameras, no speeches, just a whispered thank you to a handler who didn't have the words to respond. Ramirez didn't need words, neither did Diesel, because some actions don't need explanation. They only need to be seen. If this story moved you, we'd be honored if you subscribed to the channel, liked the video, or shared it with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. That night, long after the sun had faded and the hospital parking lot had emptied, Ramirez sat on the tailgate of his cruiser, Diesel lying at his feet. It had been hours since the rescue, but the moment kept replaying in his mind. Not the glass breaking, not the baby being pulled from the heat, not even the mother's whispered thank you. It was that first second, that first moment when Diesel had stood up without a command, turned his head slightly, and walked. Ramirez couldn't shake it. He'd trained with this dog for hundreds of hours. Obedience wasn't just a skill, it was a bond, a language, one broken only when something stronger. Then words stepped in. He ran a hand along Diesel's back, feeling the dog's muscles twitch. Slightly beneath his palm, Diesel wasn't anxious, he wasn't proud, he was simply present. Ramirez knew the report would go up the chain in the morning. He'd already written the outline, a K9 broke. Protocol. A child was found. Lives were saved. But the part he hadn't written, the part he didn't know how to explain, was the instinct. How did Diesel know? That's what everyone had asked, and Ramirez had no answer, because there was no cue, no alert tone, no warning, just action. He thought back to the training compound, to all the times Diesel had ignored noise, distractions, even food, just to obey a single spoken word. But today, Diesel had listened to something else. Was it the faint cry through the glass? A scent no human could detect? Or was it something deeper? Ramirez had seen service dogs react to seizures, diabetic crashes, even emotional shifts in trauma survivors. But this was different. There had been no prior bond, no link, just a baby in a car, and a dog that wouldn't walk away. He leaned back, staring at the stars overhead. The night air was cooler now, with a breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and car exhaust. It was peaceful, in a way the day hadn't been. Then his phone buzzed, a text from the attending nurse. Mother and baby both resting. Stable. She asked again about the dog. Wanted to say thank you. Ramirez smiled. He didn't reply. There wasn't much to say. Instead, he looked down at Diesel. The dog's ears twitched once, then settled again, still on duty, still listening. And that was when Ramirez asked the question out loud, quietly, just for himself. What did you hear? Diesel didn't move, didn't blink. But in the silence that followed, something passed between them. It wasn't an answer. Not exactly. But it felt like recognition. Maybe it wasn't about hearing anything. Maybe it was about knowing, about sensing what everyone else missed, about trusting what couldn't be. Explained, that's what stayed with Ramirez. The most, not the rescue, not the headlines he knew would come, but the decision. Because it hadn't been Diesel's job to act. It had been his instinct, his choice. And that choice had made all the difference. Later, as they drove back to the precinct, Diesel rested his head on Ramirez's thigh, not in exhaustion, but in quiet peace, as if his work was done, as if the silence meant he had done it right. And Ramirez, though still without words, understood. Sometimes, the bravest thing a dog can do is run toward something no one else sees and trust that someone will follow. A week passed. The SUV was long, gone. So were the broken glass fragments and the crowd that had gathered. There was no more heat, blistering the pavement, no scent of panic in the air. But the story hadn't left. It lived in quiet retellings. In the nurse, who now glanced at every parked car on her way in the security guard who tightened his routine around family vehicles, and in Ramirez, who hadn't looked at Diesel the same way since. The department called it a successful intervention. No reprimand, no review, just praise. But for Ramirez, it had never been about reputation. It had been about that moment, that line between order and instinct, when a dog decided not to wait. He'd watched the hospital's security footage on his own. Late one evening, there was no sound, just grainy motion. It showed a working dog breaking formation, crossing lanes, approaching a car. But without the heat, the cry, the tension, the footage felt almost empty, like trying to explain a dream by describing a photograph. What it didn't show was the stillness, The way Diesel sat down after barking, not confused, not demanding, just certain. That certainty had changed something in Ramirez. Maybe in everyone who had witnessed it. He didn't tell the story often. He didn't need to people already knew it. The kind of story that doesn't need embellishment because the facts are already impossible. And then, one morning, he saw her, Naomi, the mother. She was walking through the hospital's south entrance with the baby in her arms, healthy, eyes wide, a little, pink hat snug over soft curls. She didn't see Ramirez at first, but Diesel saw her. He lifted his head. Ears perked. Ramirez stepped forward. Giving a small nod, Naomi paused, then smiled, slowly, like someone remembering a dream they weren't sure had happened. She looked down at Diesel, then knelt. No words. Just a long, gentle moment, her baby resting against her shoulder, her hand placed softly on Diesel's head. The baby shifted slightly, breathing deep against her chest. "I never got to say thank you," Naomi whispered. "You already did," Ramirez said, and he meant it, because some stories aren't about recognition. They're about the act itself, about showing up, not because you were told to, but because something inside you wouldn't let you walk away. Diesel stayed still as she stroked behind his ear. His tail moved once. A soft, slow wag. Then they stood. Naomi nodded again, her eyes wet but steady, and walked on. Ramirez watched them disappear through the sliding doors, sunlight streaking behind them. He reached down and gave Diesel one more pat. "You didn't just save a life," he said. "You gave her back her future." Diesel didn't react, but maybe that was the point. He didn't need applause. He didn't need to understand the full weight of what he'd done, because in the moment it mattered most. He had listened to something no one else heard, and followed it all the way to a locked car, a silent child, and a second chance. If this rescue stayed with you, share it with someone who believes in instinct, love, and the heroes who don't wear capes, but collars. Subscribe for more true dog stories that show how far loyalty will go. Diesel's story could have ended that day. The headlines would have been, "Enough. The baby was saved. The mother recovered. Protocol broken." But the result, unquestioned. But some stories aren't measured by what happened. They're measured by what they leave behind. In the weeks after the rescue, Diesel became something more than a working dog. He was still on duty, still trained, still precise. But to everyone who knew what happened that day, he was also something else. Something. Sensed? The ER staff would nod when they passed him on their way in. Children in the waiting area would point and whisper. Even other handlers started watching him differently, as if they were waiting for him to move. Again, to signal something the rest of them had missed, but Diesel didn't. Change. Not in the way they expected. He didn't seek attention, didn't perform. He just continued to show up. Top Sakite. Calm, ready, listening. Ramirez started noticing how much quieter the walks had become, not in sound, but in pace. There was a patience in Diesel now that hadn't been there before. A stillness that wasn't just obedience. It was presence, like he was tuned into something just outside. What people could hear. That's when Ramirez made the decision he applied to shift Diesel's designation from threat detection to public protection and medical alert, not because the dog had changed, but because he had proven he was always more than a detector. He was a listener. The approval took time. There were tests, evaluations, long forms, but it was granted. Diesel was now officially certified to patrol not just for danger, but for life. And somehow, it felt right. One morning, Ramirez walked him past the pediatric wing. Nothing dramatic, just routine, until Diesel stopped. He turned his head slightly, paused in the middle of the hallway. A nurse walking behind them asked if something was wrong. "No," Ramirez said, watching him closely. "I think he just hears something we don't." The nurse smiled politely, but didn't understand. That was okay. Ramirez understood. Because Diesel didn't chase attention. He followed feeling. He didn't bark to be loud. He barked when something mattered. That's what made the rescue unforgettable. Not the noise, not the chaos, but the stillness, the way he had waited, watched, held his ground. That day, there hadn't been an explosion, a target, a suspect. There had only been heat, glass, silence, and one sound, one cry, small, faint, but not alone. Ramirez remembered it later that night, sitting with Diesel outside under a dark sky. Stars, barely visible behind city light. That cry hadn't just been a baby's breath against the air. It had been more. A pulse, rhythm, the kind of signal that doesn't travel through ears, but through instinct, like a second heartbeat. That's what Diesel had followed. Not panic, not command, not noise, just something real, something fragile, something that needed him, even if no one else noticed. Ramirez looked down at him now, resting beside the cruiser's bumper, eyes half closed, breathing even. "You hear the world differently," he said, and meant it. Some dogs follow training. Some dogs follow orders. But Diesel, he followed heartbeats. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that sometimes the quietest signals are the ones that matter most. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched you, please share it with someone who believes in the invisible things, instinct, timing, and the bond between human and dog. Subscribe for more stories that remind us who the real heroes are.